Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Night fell over Atlanta like a heavy pall. The downtown streets still buzzed with frenetic activity, impatient honking horns, teenage laughter, street musicians wafting saxophone notes into the humid air. Neon signs flashed red and blue across the sidewalks, wet from the recent rain. Amidst this commotion, Daniel Carter walked with measured steps. His impeccably tailored midnight blue suit and the leather briefcase he carried gave the impression of a businessman on a business trip. But what no one knew was that this tall, 52-year-old man with a lively, authoritative gaze was no mere passerby. He was about to become the city's new police chief. Daniel had chosen to arrive without escort or protocol. His philosophy was simple: before commanding, he wanted to experience the city as it was, without filters, without artifice. He walked, observing faces, noting glances, listening to sounds. It was his way of connecting with the reality of those he would soon protect. Across the street, parked across a curb, a police patrol car was already attracting attention. Inside, two officers sipped coffee. One of them, a young recruit whose face still showed hesitation, stared silently at the crowd. The other, older, blond with light eyes, a set jaw, and a proudly tailored uniform, carried a superior air: Officer Mark Reynolds. Reynolds was known in his unit for his arrogance. Believing he was the law, he often used his badge as a weapon, confident that no one would dare challenge him. That evening, as he watched Daniel walk calmly and confidently across the street, something inside him sparked, a mixture of distrust and contempt. "Look at this," he muttered to his colleague. "A guy who thinks he owns the street. I'll remind him who's in charge here." Without waiting for an answer, Reynolds threw his cup out the window and got out of the car. His boots slapped against the wet asphalt. He walked over to Daniel and stood in his way, holding up his hand like a wall. "Hey you," he said sharply, "where do you think you're going like this?" Daniel stopped, surprised by the sudden aggression. Yet he remained calm, his features barely tense. "I'm just going back to my hotel." "Is there a problem, officer?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow, offended by the calm tone that showed neither fear nor submission. "Your hotel, huh? Show me some ID. Right now." Daniel frowned slightly, but complied without question. He held out his wallet. Reynolds took a quick look, then burst into a mocking chuckle. "Daniel Carter. You think your nice suit gives you a free pass?" Without warning, he placed a firm hand on Daniel's chest and pushed him violently against a brick wall. The impact echoed through the night. Passers-by stopped, stunned. Some already took out their phones to film the scene. A woman whispered. "Another one. They always attack the same people." Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze locked with Reynolds's. Not an ounce of fear showed in his eyes, only a tense patience, like that of a man accustomed to facing violence without giving in. "You are making a grave mistake, officer," he said in a low but firm voice. Reynolds sneered, convinced he had the upper hand. "The only mistake here is you, standing on my street without my permission. And trust me, I'll teach you to respect the law." The sirens of another patrol car were already wailing in the distance, but no one, not even Reynolds, knew yet that the man he had just humiliated was no ordinary citizen. In a few hours, his identity would be revealed: Daniel Carter, Atlanta's new police chief. And that day, Mark Reynolds would bitterly regret that night when he had believed he could crush a man he thought was defenseless. The sun was rising over Atlanta, casting an orange glow that reflected off the windows of the skyscrapers. In the lobby of a large downtown hotel, Daniel Carter stood in front of the bay window, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He watched the city awaken, the comings and goings of hurried workers, the incessant ballet of taxis and buses. The scene from the previous day came back to him. He hadn't slept long. Officer Reynolds's assault had left a bitter taste in his mouth. But more than anger, it was a deep reflection that occupied him. If a mere passerby in a suit is treated this way, what about those who have no voice or status to defend themselves? Daniel knew the answer. And that's precisely why he'd accepted this mission, to reform a police force undermined by public mistrust, latent racism, and all too frequent abuses. He took a deep breath and put down his cup. Today, it all begins. He murmurs. Meanwhile, at the 14th District Police Station, Officer Mark Reynolds was recounting his version of the previous day's events. Sitting in the break room, a cocky smile on his face, he mimed his altercation with Daniel in front of his colleagues. You should have seen this guy. A suit and tie who thinks he's a CEO, self-assured. I put him in his place. These guys think they own the streets. Not while I, Mark Reynolds, patrol these streets. A hearty laugh erupted around him, but not everyone shared his amusement. Sitting a little to one side, fresh out of the academy recruit Lisa Morgan frowned. She'd heard about the videos already circulating on social media, a black man pinned against a wall by a white police officer in the middle of the street, for no apparent reason. She spoke hesitantly. Mark, don't you think you went a little too far? If that guy hadn't done anything. Reynolds burst out laughing. You're new, Morgan. You'll quickly understand, around here, if you don't show who's in charge, you'll get walked over. Trust me, this guy learned his lesson. Lisa looked down uncomfortably. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, and she knew what it meant to be stopped for no reason. A small voice inside her told her that yesterday's man wasn't as ordinary as Reynolds wanted to believe. Meanwhile, Daniel left the hotel, dressed in another sober suit, and climbed into an unmarked company car. The driver, a middle-aged man named Thomas Green, was waiting for him. As he drove off, he gave him a discreet smile. Ready for your first day, boss? Daniel nodded, unsmiling. More than ever. But today, I don't want you to drop me off directly at the Central Police Station. Take me to the Southern Districts first. I want to see the streets before I see the offices. Thomas nodded. He'd known Daniel for a long time, long enough to understand his way of working. Daniel didn't like to rule from an ivory tower. He liked to start at ground level, where the problems were visible. The car drove through the city. The upscale neighborhoods gave way to more modest areas, small, shabby houses, shuttered businesses, graffiti coloring the crumbling walls. Daniel observed everything, silent, as if etching every detail into his memory. Then, almost ironically, the car passed the 14th District Station, where Reynolds was still strutting around with his colleagues. Daniel barely looked away, but a glint crossed his eyes. Soon, think TL, they will know who I am. The afternoon was shaping up to be muggy and humid. The streets of Atlanta were teeming with people, from busy workers to idle youths loitering on the sidewalks. Daniel Carter, after discreetly visiting several neighborhoods, decided to end his walk not far from the bus station, a place known to be under heavy police surveillance. He wanted to feel the real atmosphere, the one that never appeared in official reports. It wasn't long before fate brought him face to face with the arrogance he had already tasted the day before. Sitting in his patrol car, Mark Reynolds scanned the crowd like a hunter searching for prey. His gaze immediately fell on Daniel, who was walking calmly, briefcase in hand, dressed in his trademark dark suit. Reynolds clenches his jaw. No, but it's not true. Him again? His colleague, Officer Rick Howard, looked up from his notebook. Who is that? The guy from last night. That I am important man. He thinks the streets of Atlanta are his red carpet. Not while I'm here. Without waiting, Reynolds got out of the car, Rick close behind him. He approached Daniel, who had already noticed their presence but hadn't slowed his pace. Hey you, Reynolds shouted in a voice that turned several heads. We meet again, it seems. As if by chance. Daniel stopped and sighed quietly. He fixed his calm gaze on the officer. Officer Reynolds. We already crossed paths last night. Don't you think your persistence is becoming suspicious? The policeman sneered. Suspicious? What's suspicious is you. 2 days in a row, hanging around the same streets, expensive suit and briefcase in hand. You look like a guy who's up to no good. You think I'm going to let that slide? Rick, uncomfortable, tried to calm his partner. Mark, wait. We have no proof he did anything. But Reynolds, fueled by his wounded ego, made a brusque sign. Hands on the car, Carter. Now. Passers-by began to stop, intrigued. A woman took out her phone and began filming. Daniel remained motionless, his expression closed. I repeat, officer, you are making a mistake. I have nothing to reproach myself for. Reynolds suddenly approached, grabbed him by the arm, and forced him against the patrol car. The impact caused Daniel's briefcase to fall to the ground, which opened slightly, revealing a few official files stamped with the federal seal. Lisa Morgan, who had just left the police station and was passing by, saw the scene. Her eyes widened. But what is he doing? She whispered, rushing over. She awkwardly stepped in. Officer Reynolds. Stop. This gentleman did nothing. You can't. Reynolds glared at him. Morgan, get out of here. You're still a rookie, you have nothing to say. This guy looks suspicious and I'm doing my job. Daniel turned his head slightly towards Lisa, his gaze penetrating and calm. Thank you, Officer Morgan. But let him follow through with his stupidity. Sometimes men have to learn for themselves. These enigmatic words left Lisa perplexed. However, she noticed the official seal on the documents that had fallen from the briefcase and felt her heart race. This man was no mere passerby. Meanwhile, Reynolds was already taking out the handcuffs. You're going to spend the evening at the station, Carter. We're going to dig into your history and see who you really are. Daniel gritted his teeth but remained motionless, offering his wrists without resistance. In the murmurs of the crowd filming the scene, one phrase came up again and again. Another black man arrested for no reason. No one at that moment knew that this same man, humiliated in the street, was the one who would soon lead the entire police department. The clang of handcuffs still echoed around Daniel Carter's wrists as he walked through the glass doors of the 14th District Police Station. As soon as he entered, he attracted attention. Police officers, secretaries, civilians who had come to file complaints, all paused for a moment to take in the strange scene. A dapper, obviously cultured man in a three-piece suit, escorted like a delinquent by Officer Reynolds. Daniel walked upright, his bearing haughty despite his shackled wrists. Nothing in his posture betrayed fear or panic. On the contrary, he exuded a dignity that almost disturbed those who looked at him. Reynolds, for his part, savored what he believed to be a victory. Come on, move on. You're not acting so smart now, are you? He said in a contemptuous tone. At the reception desk, Sergeant Bill O'Connor, a pot-bellied veteran, looked up from his papers. Mark, who is this guy? He asked, his voice drawling. A suspect. Nothing clear yet, but he was hanging around in a sensitive area. I'd rather keep him safe here while we verify his identity. Daniel calmly raised his voice, cutting off the exchange. I'm not a criminal, Sergeant. What your colleague called loitering was simply walking down the street, briefcase in hand. He already arrested me yesterday, without cause. Today, he's doing it again. A few police officers exchanged glances. Lisa Morgan, who had been quietly following, entered behind them and called out. That's right, Sergeant. He didn't do anything illegal. This man was just walking around. We can't arrest him just because. She stopped, unable to say aloud the word she was thinking. Noir. O'Connor frowned in annoyance. Reynolds, you know we're already under pressure with all these videos circulating. Did you film yourself arresting some random guy again? Reynolds shrugged confidently. Let them film, let them talk. I'm doing my job. Criminals sometimes wear suits, Sergeant. Don't be fooled. Daniel held her gaze, without raising his voice. If I were a criminal, Officer Reynolds, do you really think I'd walk around in broad daylight with official documents in my briefcase? All eyes turned to him. Lisa, nervous, dropped a piece of paper she had discreetly picked up, the file with a clear federal seal. She tried to slip it discreetly into the briefcase, but several colleagues had already noticed the insignia. A murmur ran through the room. "Federal documents," whispered an agent. "Who is this guy?" asked another. Reynolds, tense, tried to cut it short. "Bluff. Papers he stole, nothing more. We'll question him and see." Lisa opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel gave her a simple look. This look wasn't pleading or worried, it was reassuring. As if he were silently saying, "Leave it. The time will come." A few minutes later, Daniel was led into a small interrogation room. The gray walls, the dim light bulb, the metal table, everything exuded coldness. Reynolds stood in front of him, ready to grill his prisoner. But Daniel remained unperturbed, sitting upright, his hands clasped on the table. "So, Carter. Who are you really?" Reynolds said, a smirk on his lips. "A spy? A shady guy playing businessman?" Daniel didn't answer. He simply stared at the officer, a heavy silence filling the room. This silence wasn't that of a guilty man, but of a man sure of himself, a man who knew that time was on his side. On the other side of the one-way glass, several officers were watching the scene. Lisa was among them. She whispered to her colleague Rick Howard. "Look at him. This man is not a suspect. Do you see him? He's not a thug, he's not a drug dealer. He exudes authority, almost military." Rick nodded uncomfortably. "I think Reynolds is getting himself into a mess." At the same time, in the lobby of the police station, a secretary was putting down the receiver. She had just received a direct call from the mayor's office. A special meeting was about to take place the next morning, the introduction of Atlanta's new police chief. And without knowing it, several of the police officers present had already spent the day before humiliating him. The sun was already high when the first videos of Daniel Carter's arrest began circulating on social media. Filmed by several passers-by the day before, the scene showed a suit-clad black man being brutally slammed against a police car by Officer Mark Reynolds, with no clear motive given. The footage was striking. Daniel remained calm and his movements measured, while Reynolds insulted him in undertones and took out the handcuffs. A woman's voice could also be heard in the crowd. "It's always the same. Just because he's black, they think they can do anything." Within hours, the videos exploded, shared on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. They triggered a wave of indignation. Two young men, Tyrone and Marcus, were watching the video on a phone between their cups of coffee. "Look at this, brother. Even when you wear a suit, even when you look respectable, you're still a suspect in their eyes," Tyrone said, shaking his head. Marcus sighed. "It's nothing new, but this is too obvious." "And the worst part? The man remains calm, dignified. Can you imagine? If I were him, I would have exploded. But for him, nothing. That's what shocks me the most." An elderly cafe patron, a Gulf War veteran, looked up from his newspaper and grumbled. "This cop is going to fall. There are too many people filming now. We can't hide this kind of abuse anymore." A group of young women were also watching the video between boxing sessions. Keisha, gloves around her neck, called out. "You know what scares me? If that man had reacted even a little bit, he might be dead today." Her friend Latoya nodded. "Exactly. And then they would have said that he resisted arrest." Another added, clenching her fists. "We need to share this. Everyone needs to see how they're still treating us in 2025. The atmosphere was tense. The police officers had seen the videos circulating since morning. Some exchanged worried glances, others tried to downplay the situation. Lisa Morgan walked into the break room, phone in hand. She showed the screen to Rick Howard. "Look. It's everywhere now. People are furious." Rick sighed. "Yeah. And it's going to hit the whole precinct, not just Reynolds. You know how it works, one cop slips up, and the whole unit gets hit by the storm." At the back of the room, Reynolds arrived, still sure of himself. So? Everyone's getting excited about a truncated video? I'm doing my job, period. Lisa stood up, her voice trembling but firm. Your job is to protect and serve, not to humiliate and assault innocent people. Do you realize what you've done? This man wasn't a criminal. He wasn't even resisting. Reynolds sneered. You think you know better than me, Morgan? Go back to the academy. The streets are my playground. And trust me, this Carter or whatever guy, he looks suspicious. I only did what I had to do. Silence fell. Several police officers present did not dare to react, but it was clear that they had doubts. Anger was beginning to rise. Residents gathered on the sidewalks, holding makeshift signs, "Justice for all, stop the abuse of power, enough is enough." Local radio stations picked up the story. A presenter said live on air. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a black citizen arrested without reason, humiliated in front of witnesses. How long will we tolerate this? And in a hushed office, far from the hustle and bustle, the city's mayor was also watching the video. His brow furrowed. He turned to his advisor. This isn't just any man they've humiliated. They don't know who he is yet. Prepare for tomorrow's meeting. It's going to be explosive. The next morning, the conference room at Atlanta City Hall was packed. Reporters, cameras, city councilors, police officials, and a few influential community members were gathered. The air was heavy, as if everyone knew something momentous was about to be announced. Since the day before, videos of Daniel Carter's arrest had been playing non-stop on national networks. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News all showed the man being pinned against the car by Officer Reynolds. The hashtag Justice for Carter was already trending worldwide. In front of the city hall, protesters held up signs. We want accountability. Reynolds out. No justice, no peace. The slogans rose up to the thick glass of the conference room. Mayor Richard Coleman, wearing a dark suit and burgundy tie, stepped up to the lectern. His expression was silent. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Atlanta, he began in a deep voice, that we are in a storm. A video has revealed an arrest that has deeply shocked our community. I want to remind you that in our city, no one is above the law, not even the police. A murmur rippled through the room. Several reporters had already raised their hands to ask questions, but Coleman raised his own to quiet them. I know you came looking for answers. I'll give you one. Starting today, Atlanta has a new police chief. A man of integrity, a respected leader, who has dedicated his life to serving this country and its citizens. He paused, deliberately leaving the suspense hanging. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you, General Daniel Carter. The room exploded. Cameras clicked frantically. The reporters all shouted at once. And that's when an imposing figure entered through the double doors at the back of the room. Daniel Carter, dressed in an impeccable midnight blue suit, was advancing calmly, his gaze fixed, his bearing military. A gradual silence fell. Even the most skeptical were left speechless. A journalist whispered. Wait, is that him? The same man arrested yesterday? Another answered in a low voice. Oh my God, it's the man in the video. At the police station, the announcement was being broadcast live on a screen. Lisa Morgan stood there frozen, her hand covering her mouth. I knew it. I felt that this man was not just anyone. Rick Howard let out a whistle. A general, and not just any general, the city's new police chief. Reynolds is dead, he just doesn't know it yet. All eyes turned to Mark Reynolds, who was sitting in a chair, his face ashen. He tried to compose himself, but his voice betrayed his confusion. This is a joke. It's impossible. He must have used his connections. Rick stood up abruptly, exasperated. Shut up, Reynolds. You just put your knee on your future superior's back. Do you realize? You just humiliated the man who has the power to decide your future in the police force. Reynolds paled even more. Standing at the lectern, Daniel spoke. His deep, calm voice filled the room. Yesterday I was arrested in my own city. Not because I had committed a crime, but because I was born with a skin color that, for some, remains a source of suspicion. A heavy silence fell over the assembly. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about us. About our city. About a police force that must once again become an institution of justice, not fear. About a community that must be protected, not surveilled. Applause broke out, first timid, then growing louder. Daniel concludes. I promise you this, as long as I am in office, no citizen of Atlanta, regardless of their background, will ever be treated the way I was yesterday. The cameras focused on him. In the streets, protesters, hearing the news on their phones, burst into joy. The angry shouts turned to cheers. But at the police station, Mark Reynolds, sitting alone in a corner, felt his world crumble. The new appointment had resounded throughout Atlanta like a clap of thunder. But at the Central Police Station, the atmosphere was even more electric. Everyone knew that the moment of truth was approaching. In the middle of the afternoon, a message appeared on the police station's internal screen. Immediate summons to Chief Carter's office. Recipient, Officer Mark Reynolds. Reynolds stood frozen in front of his computer. His hands were shaking slightly. Every police officer in the room stared at him, some with pity, others with a bitter smile. Rick Howard crossed his arms and huffed. Good luck, man. You're going to need it. Lisa Morgan watched Reynolds stand up silently. She felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. She didn't like Reynolds, but she knew what awaited her would be terrible. Reynolds walked to the chief's large office. Standing at the door, he took a deep breath, like a soldier before execution, then knocked twice sharply. Come in, replied a deep, firm voice. He opened it. Daniel Carter stood behind a large, dark wooden desk, his hands flat on the surface, his gaze fixed on it. His impeccable uniform, adorned with his chief of police badge, emphasized his authority. Close the door, Officer Reynolds, he said calmly. The voice was not aggressive, but icy. Reynolds obeyed, closed the door gently, and stood there, his eyes averted. Daniel sat down slowly, then gestured for Reynolds to take a seat opposite him. Sit down. Reynolds complied uncomfortably, his hands clasped to hide their trembling. Daniel stared at him for a long time, without speaking. The silence weighed like an anvil. Reynolds finally cracked. Chief. I want to say that what happened yesterday wasn't personal. I followed my instincts. I thought that. Daniel raised a hand to interrupt him. Your instinct? His voice rose slightly, but remained contained. Your instinct told you that because I was a black man in a suit, I must be suspicious? Reynolds swallowed hard. That's not what I meant. So explain to me, Daniel cut in, explain to me why, 2 days in a row, you targeted me. Why, in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras, you humiliated me, handcuffed me, and slammed me against a car, without any evidence. Explain to me, officer. The silence thickened. Reynolds opened his mouth, closed it again, unable to formulate a valid justification. Daniel stood up slowly, walked around the desk, and approached Reynolds. He stood right in front of him, imposing, almost overwhelming. Do you know what you did? He said in a deep voice. You didn't just disrespect a citizen. You undermined the trust this city should have in its police force. You proved right those who say we don't protect, we oppress. Reynolds looked down. His cheeks flushed. Daniel continued, more harshly. If I weren't the man I am, if I didn't have strong shoulders, you could have ruined my life in a matter of minutes. Because for some, the image of a handcuffed black man is enough to define their guilt. Do you understand the gravity of your actions, Reynolds? Yes. Chief, Reynolds whispered, his voice breaking. Daniel stared at him for a moment longer, then stepped back slightly. I have 2 choices. The first is to have you fired immediately, expose you publicly, and let you weather the storm you've created. The second is to give you one chance to redeem yourself. Just one. Reynolds looked up in surprise. You would be willing to give you a chance, Daniel finishes, yes. But make no mistake, the slightest mistake, the slightest recurrence, and your career will be over. Definitely. He leaned in slightly, his eyes locked with Reynolds's. From now on, you will work under my direct supervision. And you will learn what it means to serve and protect. Understand? Reynolds nodded briskly. Yes, Chief. Understood. Daniel returned to sit behind his desk. You can dispose. Reynolds stood up quickly, opened the door, and left, panting. In the hallway, Lisa Morgan was waiting for him, arms crossed. So? She asked. Reynolds looked at her, still upset. He gave me a chance. But I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. Lisa gave a small smile. So maybe you still have something to learn. The day after his face-off with Reynolds, Daniel Carter arrived early at the Central Police Station. The sun had barely risen when he was already in his office, a stack of files in front of him. For the first time in a long time, the entire department felt that the wind of change was blowing. At 9 o'clock sharp, Daniel summoned all the unit commanders and several officers for a strategy meeting. The conference room was full, worried, curious, and sometimes skeptical faces. Lisa Morgan and Rick Howard sat in the back, while Reynolds, still scarred by the previous day's interview, kept a low profile. Daniel entered, his step measured, his presence imposing. He placed his file on the table and scanned the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he began in a firm voice, the Atlanta Police Department is in crisis. Not because of crime, not because of lack of resources, but because of ourselves. A heavy silence fell. In recent years, too many citizens have seen us as a threat rather than a shield. Videos of brutality, abuses of power, growing distrust, all of this has destroyed the trust we should embody. He paused, letting his words hit every officer present. This ends today. Under my leadership, we will begin radical reform. He opened his file and took out a series of documents. First measure, every intervention must be filmed. Body cameras will now be mandatory, without exception. Any officer who deactivates or forgets their device will be immediately suspended. A few disapproving murmurs were heard. Daniel raised his hand. Second measure, we will introduce a mandatory training program in de-escalation and conflict management. No more shouting, no more unnecessary aggression. Words must precede force. Rick nodded in satisfaction, while Reynolds tensed. Third measure, any report of discrimination, whether from a civilian or a colleague, will be treated with the utmost rigor. There is no tolerance. I would rather lose 10 men than keep one who dishonors this uniform. A shudder ran through the room. Daniel looked at them one by one, his penetrating gaze forcing each of them to either hold their gaze or lower it. Captain Frank Miller, a gray-haired veteran, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Chief. Some of your changes are going to be poorly received. The guys are going to think you're trying to control them instead of trusting them. Daniel approached him and answered calmly, but firmly. Captain Miller, trust isn't a blank check. It's earned. And right now, our citizens no longer trust us. So either we change, or we die as an institution. Silence fell again. Even Miller was persuaded, nodding reluctantly. Daniel continued. Finally, there is the question of internal discipline. All eyes turned to Reynolds, who felt sweat trickle down his back. Daniel didn't look away from him. I won't give any theoretical examples. Yesterday, one of you demonstrated exactly what we must ban: abuse of authority, prejudice, public humiliation. This man was not fired, not because he deserved to stay, but because I still believe he can change. A murmur ran through the room. Reynolds stared at his hands, ashamed. Starting today, Officer Reynolds will report directly to me. He will be assigned to community patrols, with detailed reporting requirements after each call. Consider this a test. And I'm warning you all, no further deviations will be tolerated. Lisa Morgan exchanged a look with Rick. She knew this test was going to be a real ordeal for Reynolds. Daniel concluded by getting up from his chair. I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here to please. I'm here to transform this police force into an institution worthy of respect. And believe me, I will succeed, with or without you. His words echoed long after he left the room. Rick, as he left, whispered to Lisa. Finally, someone who speaks the truth. I've been waiting for this for years. Lisa nodded, inspired. Carter is not just a chief. He is a leader. The difference is enormous. Meanwhile, Reynolds stood alone, overwhelmed. Carter's reforms weren't just aimed at him, but he knew he was a living example of them. For the first time in his career, he wondered if he still had a place on this force. The sun was setting on the horizon, casting an orange glow over the busy streets of Atlanta. Daniel Carter had decided the best way to test Reynolds was to take him out into the field, where the problems were real, away from offices and speeches. Lisa Morgan and Rick Howard were waiting in the police station parking lot. Daniel gestured for Reynolds to get into the unmarked vehicle. Reynolds tensed and sat down next to the chief, his hands clenched in his lap. Ready for your first real lesson? Daniel asked calmly. Yes. Chief, Reynolds murmured, his gaze shifty. Rick, getting into the next patrol vehicle, whispered to Lisa. This guy won't last 5 minutes if he keeps up his usual ego. You'll see. Carter knows exactly how to test people, she replied. The car drove through the streets of the West End neighborhood, an area known for its social tensions, small businesses, and residents wary of the police. Cars drove by slowly, some passers-by casting curious or suspicious glances. Daniel remained silent, observing every detail. Reynolds, for his part, was on edge. He saw young people hanging around the alleys and immediately suspected the worst. Chief, do you think they're all dangerous? He asked nervously. Daniel looked at him calmly. No, Reynolds. But you tend to see danger where it doesn't exist. Learn to look before you react. Suddenly, a group of 3 teenagers stopped near a corner store. One of them threw an empty bottle, which lightly hit the body of the vehicle. Reynolds sat up abruptly, hand on his gun. Chief, look. I knew this neighborhood. Daniel raised his hand to stop him. Breathe. Evaluate. He calmly got out of the vehicle, his hands visible, and approached the group. Reynolds reluctantly followed, stiff as a board. Hi guys, said Daniel in a firm but gentle voice, that I'm Chief Carter. There's been a small incident with this bottle. Everything's fine, no one's hurt. But I want us to talk, calmly. The teenagers, surprised by Daniel's posture and tone, relaxed slightly. One of them, Trayvon, spoke. We just wanted to have fun, no harm done. Daniel nodded. I understand. But if you throw things at cars, someone could get hurt. Understand? The kids nodded. Daniel turned to Reynolds, who was clenched. Do you see, Reynolds, he said calmly. No need for threats or force. Just respect and communication. Reynolds remained silent, red with shame. Daniel led the group in discussing neighborhood safety, listening to their concerns and frustrations. He finally smiled slightly and gave them some tips for avoiding conflict with the police. Reynolds, for the first time, realized the impact a dignified and respectful police chief could have. His ego, which had dictated his arrogant actions for years, had just received a monumental blow. Back at the vehicle, Daniel looked at him and said, Today you saw the difference between fear and respect. If you want to survive in this city, you must learn to create respect, not impose fear. Reynolds didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. He had just realized that his career and his image had changed. When they returned, Lisa and Rick waited, eager to know the outcome. Reynolds got out of the car, his shoulders hunched, his face closed. So, Rick demands. I I think I still have a lot to learn, Reynolds murmured, almost to himself. Lisa smiled, reassured. That's a good start. Daniel watched the scene from afar, a slight smile on his lips. The reformation was only just beginning, but the first test had just been passed. The city of Atlanta was in turmoil. Since Daniel Carter's appointment as police chief, residents had been watching the department's every move. Citizens, wary but curious, waited to see if the reform would bring concrete results. Around 5:30 p.m., the control room received a call. A noisy crowd had formed in front of a downtown shopping center. Excited youths were throwing objects and blocking traffic. Lisa Morgan looked at the screen and frowned. This is exactly the kind of situation where old reflexes can cause damage. Daniel calmly turned to Reynolds. This is your moment. You're going to step in. And this time, you're going to do it right. Reynolds, pale but resolute, nodded. Yes, Chief. I'll be careful. The patrol car arrived at the mall. Passers-by were already filming with their phones. Teenagers were throwing cans and shouting insults. The tension was palpable. Daniel turned to Reynolds. Remember, respect and communication. No unnecessary force. Reynolds took a deep breath and stepped out of the vehicle. His gaze met the teenagers. He raised his hands slightly to show his good faith. Hey, everyone. Calm down for a moment. Listen to me. A young man, Jamal, threw a can at Reynolds, but Reynolds deftly caught it without violence and threw it back to the ground. You see, said Daniel from the edge. No provocation. Just control. Reynolds, encouraged, spoke. I know you're frustrated. I know many of you feel misunderstood or attacked by the police. But throwing objects and blocking the road doesn't solve anything. We can talk. I can listen. The teenagers, surprised by this calm and human tone, lowered their improvised weapons and began to whisper among themselves. Daniel walked over and met Reynolds alongside the youths. Talk to them, Reynolds. Listen to them. Reynolds knelt slightly to be at eye level with the teenagers. Who wants to tell me why you are angry? He asked. A young girl, Kendra, spoke up. We're tired of the police seeing us as criminals just because we hang around our neighborhood. Reynolds nodded, genuinely attentive. I understand. And I'm sorry you felt that way. But throwing things only makes things worse. We can work together to make sure your voice is heard. A respectful silence fell. The teenagers seemed to be analyzing his words, surprised by this unexpected approach. Daniel intervened gently. This is what it means to serve and protect. You don't force fear, you inspire respect. Reynolds just did it. And I'm proud of him. Reynolds, his hands still visible, felt a surge of pride and relief. For the first time, he had applied Carter's lessons: control, communication, and empathy. The group began to disperse, some talking with Reynolds to explain their frustrations and propose solutions. Lisa, who was watching, whispered to Rick. He finally understood. This is real change. Rick smiled. Yes, and that is more powerful than any brutal arrest. Back in the car, Reynolds looked at Daniel. Boss. I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something right. Daniel gave a slight smile. You're making progress, Reynolds. But this is just the beginning. The real test will be constant. Lisa, in the vehicle behind them, silently noted in her notebook, today, an arrogant cop has become an example of reform thanks to a visionary leader. A few weeks had passed since the first patrol under the supervision of Daniel Carter. The police station had changed. Officers had learned to adopt the new rules, to behave with greater respect and professionalism. Body cameras were now ubiquitous, incident reporting was more accurate, and communication with citizens was becoming a priority. Reynolds entered the police station earlier than usual. He had received an alert: an armed robbery was taking place in a sensitive area, with civilians trapped inside a store. Lisa Morgan and Rick Howard were already standing in the briefing room. "This is your chance, Reynolds," Lisa said softly, "show that you have changed." Reynolds took a deep breath. For the first time, he didn't just feel fear or ego, he felt a mixture of responsibility and determination. The patrol quickly arrived on the scene. Daniel and Reynolds got out of the vehicle, Reynolds this time aware of how he should act. Through the shop window, they saw a nervous, armed man holding several customers hostage. Regular police officers might have attempted a violent entry, but Daniel whispered, "Remember, respect and communication. You can resolve this without violence." Reynolds stepped forward, hands visible, voice calm. "Sir, I know you're angry. You can lower your weapon and speak. No one here wants to hurt you." The man gave a tight smile, surprised by Reynolds's calm, human tone. Who are you to talk to me like that?" the man asked, his voice trembling. "I'm a police officer. But I'm not here to judge you. I just don't want anyone to get hurt." The customers, previously paralyzed by fear, relaxed slightly, encouraged by Reynolds's approach. Daniel stood back, carefully observing every move. After several minutes of calm and measured negotiation, the man finally laid down his weapon and was subdued without any shots being fired. The customers filed out, trembling but unharmed. One of them, Mrs. Williams, a local pensioner, took Reynolds by the arm. Thank you for your calm and your humanity. You saved us." Reynolds felt an unfamiliar emotion wash over him, pride, relief, and redemption. For the first time, he had used his position as a police officer to protect, not humiliate. Back at the station, Lisa and Rick were waiting. Daniel came in and placed his hand on Reynolds' shoulder. "Today you have shown what it truly means to serve and protect. You have earned respect, not through fear, but through your actions." Reynolds looked down, moved. "Thank you, Chief, thank you for giving me a chance." Lisa smiles. "It's nice to see someone change for real." Rick added. "And now, Reynolds, you are an example to us all." In the days that followed, Atlantans noticed a tangible change. Police interventions were calmer, arrests more respectful, and trust was beginning to return. Videos of brutality were rare, replaced by images of police officers guiding, protecting, and listening to their communities. Reynolds, however, was no longer the arrogant officer he had once been. Every action, every decision, now bore the mark of Daniel Carter's teachings. Daniel, observing the neighborhood from his office, allowed himself a small smile. Reform was never easy, but with patience and leadership, even the most stubborn could change. And in the streets of Atlanta, a wind of respect and justice was finally blowing, promising a future where fear gave way to trust.